David Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start by commending the member for Hemsworth who's just spoken? I agree with very much what he had to say. I will say to him that although the laws and the constitution underpinning this, as he says, up to 1,000 years old, much of the tradition on modern demonstrations goes back to the 1930s, when the behaviour of the police with respect to demonstrators then was led to the creation of the National Council of Civil Liberties, for example. Indeed, I know this because my grandfather led a demonstration, more than one, and got arrested after he was back in charge by the police for inciting violence, and he was sent to prison for 6 months, although I will say the judge gave him the option of being bound over for 6 months not to make irritating speeches, and he said he'd rather go to prison. So there we are. Anyway, now the member for Northampton South made one of the best speeches I have heard in this House for a very long time on something as fundamental as the right to prayer without intercession by the state. That is an issue which is thousands of years old, and he's absolutely right. This is problematic. What we're debating today is the outcome of an over heavy-handed bill. That's where it starts. All of us were outraged by the behaviour of some of the demonstrators disrupting ambulances and Lord knows what else, and then the government reacted to that, but it overreacted, frankly, and what the Lords have done has corrected it, and the government, of course, has conceded a number of the important points. They've removed the possibility that a serious disruption prevention order, some of the most restrictive measures we have, short of imprisonment, can be imposed on people who have been convicted. Although I will say to the Minister, 5 years after a conviction is a very long time. Most non-violent convictions are spent after 1 year. So 5 years is a devil of a long time to allow somebody to have these sort of restrictions put upon them. They've removed the electronic tagging requirement again. The idea that creating nuisance should lead to you being tagged, in my view, is a barbaric proposal, and that's gone. And an explicit provision that the police cannot use their powers against journalists was carried, I think, by about 90 votes in the Lords, and of course it shouldn't even have come up. It's so obvious that that's undermining for us. Now, there's still these SDPOs, they're called, are still very restrictive for what are relatively simple offences. They involve bans on using the internet in certain ways, bans, of course, in being in certain areas, bans on attending protests, and many other restrictions. And they resemble control orders, which are counter-terrorism measures, remember, counter-terrorism measures. So it's a very crude approach. As I said, 5 years is too long for the criminal offence to be unspent, and so I would hope the government would look again at that, or if they don't, that the Lords will send it back again. And Liberty, the organisation Liberty, who I say came into being because of these sorts of problems with respect to demonstrations in the 30s, have raised concerns about the possibility of political interference in this, and this is really serious, that the Secretary of State will be given powers to issue guidance on how to identify individuals to whom the police should apply an SDPO, and in that we, in this House, will have no say. So that's, again, a very critical concern. But the most important thing was raised by the member for Hemsworth, which is this issue of suspicionless stop and search. Stop and search is an abuse of our freedoms. Full stop. Being stopped by a policeman, required to strip off or empty your pockets or empty your bags and so on, is an abuse which we don't allow in this country. And given the last year, I mean, let me be clear, the vast majority of the police are very responsible, very decent, public-spirited people, but the last year has shown there are also some other people in that. The Sarah Everard offence was referred to, Cousins and so on, who was charged on other offences just recently. And it demonstrates that you do not want to hand over unfettered power to people who might abuse it. And that is the simple point. And what the state is doing here is handing over that. So I think that what we're looking at here is suspicionless stop and search has to be restricted or eliminated, because if we don't, we'll be in the same position as some states which we have no sympathy. Now, this is my last point, Madam Deputy Speaker. but I want just to get to reinforce the question of the suspicionless stop and search with quotations from Her Majesty's Inspector of Police, who went round 10 police forces and asked them their opinions. And right enough, there was a spectrum of opinions, a spectrum. But I'm going to read out to the House, read into the record, 1, 2, 3 paragraphs. They said, at one end of the spectrum, an officer we interviewed described the current legislation, that's the existing legislation, not this, as providing an arsenal of weapons for police to use, including many appropriate for use in the context of disruptive protests. Consequently, that interviewee, as a police officer, and many others saw no need for change. Arguing against the proposal for a new stop and search power, Home Office Proposal 5 in this, another officer stated that, quotes, a little inconvenience is more acceptable than a police state, close quotes. That's a policeman speaking. And the inspectorate said, we agree with this sentiment. That's Her Majesty's Inspectorate, with all of the knowledge they have, much greater than that within the civil service and the Home Office. All the knowledge they had said they thought that this is unnecessary and veers towards a police state if we keep it. So on that basis alone, I say to the Minister, please look again at getting rid of this proposal.